Hello, welcome to the Viewpoint. I am Mamadou Mbouch. According to some estimates, over 200,000 Gambians currently live in the diaspora, and their contribution to our GDP is immense. Last year, for instance, the money they sent back, referred to as remittances, constituted about 48% of our GDP, according to the central bank. And there are studies showing that remittance flows into Africa surpassed foreign direct investment and developmental aid for the first time in 2019. The Gambia is among the topmost recipients of remittances, ranking 14th out of 165 countries surveyed worldwide and third in Africa. To reflect this increased significance of the diaspora, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs adapted its name to include not only international cooperation, but also Gambians abroad, and created what is called a diaspora directorate. And by the time this program airs, a data portal, a website and data portal will have been launched by the ministry. But really, what constitutes a diaspora? The concept appears to have escaped decisively its historical confines in the Jewish experience, as it were, and is now used in a variety of settings for a variety of purposes. And our second question, what is the shaping dynamic of the homeland diaspora axis, as it were? How can we best harness this developmental asset? Yes? For the benefit of the national good. Here to help me answer these questions and perhaps more is somebody described by academia, an online research sharing website. This is what it has to say about my next guest. He is currently a reader in international relations, political science and humanitarian action at Uppsala University in Sweden. He was a 2017 Erasmus Fellow in Oxford, where he took critical theory and comparative politics, and a 2020 Erasmus Fellow at Sciences Po in Paris, that is the Paris Institute of Political Science. He's also a social commentator based in Sweden. Welcome to the program, Ahmad Jang.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I suppose, I was gonna ask you whether my introduction of you was accurate, because you know how it is with these things. No sooner are they written than they come out, than they go out of date, as it were. So I take it that was accurate.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So that makes me wonder. I mean, you're based in Sweden. What are you doing here? On vacation, work, research?
Interesting question. I'm actually on vacation. So vacation would basically mean I am here to do some work, but also to take the opportunity to familiarize myself with a lot of things that have been going on in this country since 2017. But of course to also meet friends and families. But more importantly, since I came, I have been engaged, doing work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, at the Diaspora Directorate, where I have been hired as a diaspora mentor by the UN IOM. So I am here in my capacity as a private citizen, of course, not as a mentor or as a consultant in that capacity.
Absolutely,
yes.
From what I've read of your your details,
exactly.
Your educational details there,
exactly,
highly accomplished, and the journey, you're still on that journey.
Yes.
So, but give us a bit the antecedents.
Yeah.
Just a short summary of where you're from, educational background in Gambia.
Interesting. I am from Sierra, Central River region. I did my schooling in Bansan. And then I moved to Rikombos, where I did my high school, and then I moved to Sweden actually. And before I moved to Sweden, I worked in the media here in the Gambia, where I was a reporter, and then a senior reporter, editorial writer, without a university degree, which is of course challenging during those days, during the former regime government, I will say. Then I moved to Sweden with a lot of complexities, dislocation.
Which when was this? When did you move?
Around the 2011, something like that. And then a lot of complexities, like I said, dislocation, and being a young person during those days, you feel like, I'm very hungry, I need to go to uni, I need to do all of this transition to realize my sweetest dream, in a sense. And then when I came in, I was like, I want to go to uni. They were like, okay, but then as a national...
But how was it like, the process of getting there? How was it like for you? What was your experience?
I mean, I think like every older person, I didn't move there because we had war in Gambia. It's a voluntary, it's a decision that I made by myself. I moved through a family reunion, and then when I moved in, I felt like I needed to go to uni. But I think the biggest transition was like having a career and then starting from scratch in a country where the language is totally different from what you're used to. And then they were like, okay, the working language is Swedish, university is in Swedish. If you want to go to uni, since you are not a non-paying tuition fee student, you need to learn Swedish, basically. So I had to go to language school. I finished language school and I went to do my degree in international relations, which was in English, in Swedish, of course, and in English. So I would do a lot of translation and understanding, whereas my classmate would be doing a lot of readings to understand, right?
Yes. So generally, was the country welcoming your experience?
Yes, it was welcoming. It was very welcoming. Sweden is a very welcoming country, I will say. We've seen a kind of a paradigm shift for the past 10 years or so, or less than that. I think the past 5-6 years, right-wing extremists are gaining a lot of popularity, and that has to do with a lot of failures of the neoliberal policies to get people back to work and all of that. So I think it is still welcoming, comparatively welcoming, if I should say so. By that I mean compared to other countries. Sweden and Germany are two countries that have taken actually a lot of immigrant per GDP, per capita, I would say, compared to many other countries.
So for you, really, your primary purpose for going there was to further education?
Exactly. When I came in, the idea was like I needed to get into uni. And I did that. I did my bachelor's in, I think, 1.5 years instead of 2, because I did a lot of things at the same time. And then, I moved on to graduate school, and then further on, I started doing my own research.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now let's dive into the deep end. As a way of sort of framing our discussion here, let's reflect a bit on diaspora. Let me put it that way. Is it that anybody who just leaves, as it were, what they call the home country, go and live somewhere else? That's part of the diaspora. Obviously, I would like to imagine that I would discount, for instance, people who go tourists, people who go for touristic reasons, and maybe for short business trips, they don't count. So essentially, is it if I just go and live in another country and I make it home and I live there, then am I part of a diaspora? Is it as simple as that, or am I missing something?
I think you might both be closer to the of course the ontology, the definition of what a diaspora is. But I think it's also important to take into consideration that not all migrations is considered diaspora. Of course, not all migration are product of diaspora, but all diaspora are product of migration. So it's important to take that into consideration. The second point to take into consideration is that with globalization and cosmopolitanism, which you just mentioned, moving to another country and staying there and feeling home, then you can realize that anybody can just move to another place and you call it home. That's something also we need to take into consideration. But I think more importantly, what constitutes a diaspora is also the ties and the bonds that you feel, the material tie and the bonds and all of that you feel like you owe to the country you come from. So I think maintaining that tie, that affinity, it's something that actually it's something that goes on to the ontology, to the definition of what a diaspora is. But like you said, you mentioned that in the beginning, what we used to know as diaspora in the 50s, the Israeli diaspora or the Swedish diaspora who moved to the US in the 1900s, or the Italians who moved from Sicily to the US in the 1900s, is no more the case today. With the concomitant of communication brought by globalization and all of that, transnationalism, you realize that the concept diaspora has also got a sort of a paradigm shift, in terms of understanding.
Absolutely. So here I'll ask you, so diaspora is just one aspect of migration. So I wonder, what are the other categories, as it were?
Yeah, you can have, for example, a refugee. Let's say you can have internal refugees, like there might be conflict in the Combos, and then people will just move and stay in Basse, in some small Swadan places. They are, of course, internal refugees who are product of migration in a sense, but then they do not constitute the diaspora in that sense.
I see.
Yes.
So diaspora, can we say, is it different from what they call economic and political refugeeism? One
yes,
can put it
one
that way.
one can be a political refugees in the 50s, and then you move to the US, and you live in the US from the 50s until today. You are a product of migration. You are a diaspora citizen, right? Your kids are also Gambians diaspora in that sense. I think where we usually go astray in terms of trying to understand the diaspora is the fact that a lot of people do not take into consideration, let's say, someone who lives in Senegal. And I think someone who lives in Dakar and left Gambia and lives in Dakar, they are, of course, Gambian diaspora. Somebody who left Senegal and lives in Casamance is a Gambian diaspora in that context. So usually, even in policy circles, in many governments, when they talk about the diaspora, they look at the transactional part, and that's where they look at, people coming from Europe who have money and send money back home and all of that. But then you have diaspora, which is just maybe 100 kilometers away from you.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
even though our thinking seems to sort of focus more, concentrate more on the West and that sort of thing, the Babylon, ultimate Babylon, as it were.
Exactly.
That's where they want to go.
Exactly.
So that's it. So in a sense, now let's talk about formations of diaspora. How this thing called diaspora, how are these things formed? Because to my mind, the way we live outside, to some extent, has to be a reflection of the way we are inside. Mm-hmm. So I posit in my own head a kind of heterogeneity. Mm-hmm. I don't see a common platform. Mm-hmm. Whereas when I say diaspora, it sort of conjures up an imagery of talking about a singular thing, a simple thing. But in reality, it isn't, is it?
I'm very happy you mentioned that. There is no homogeneity in terms of the diaspora. It's a heterogeneous concept in that sense. And then, like that grouping that you talked about, you can have Gambian diasporas in Sweden that are divided also into different cleavages, different categories, right? But then, like you mentioned right now, I don't think there is a kind of a uniformity when we talk about the diaspora, right? Where we have to look at context, we have to also look at the period that we're talking about. In the 50s, when you talk about the diaspora, is usually the African peoples in the Americas, right? Like Marcus Garvey and others in the early 40s who were talking about the African liberation. They came together in London and formed the organization of the African Union in the early 60s. They were talking about the diaspora as a movement. As a movement. But now when you look at it today with like I said, cosmopolitanism and of course globalization, you realize that the diaspora is not only a heterogeneous, but it's also a mobile force. It moves around. It moves just like goods and properties, right? Somebody can have a Swedish citizenship. Today you are a Gambian diaspora in Sweden. In few years you move to Australia. You marry, you have kids, and all of that. I think that brings us back to the issue of citizenship, which I had a very lengthy discussion with a lot of people about. And citizenship, it's becoming very blurred. The concept citizenship. When you look at it today, a lot of people will probably tell you in Europe, I don't know how it is here right now, but a lot of people in Europe would probably tell you, oh, I like Berlin, oh, I like Stockholm, oh, I like Barcelona, oh, I like New York or Washington, right? Very few people would tell you, oh, I like Germany, or I like Sweden, or I like these places, you know. People are more loyal to cities, you know, than countries. So I think the issue of loyalty is also somehow dissipating, is disappearing from the discourse of what entails citizenship.
Or maybe there's a shift in loyalties?
There is a shift in loyalties, like I said, and it has to do with the fact that we live in a globalized world where I can feel Swedes today, even though I'm black, of course. Tomorrow I can feel more Gambian than more Swedes, right? When I come to Gambia, I have a lot of cultural conflict also somehow. It could be maybe time frame, you know. if I am in Sweden, I do have like a lot of conflict also sometimes here and there. It has to do with my cultural background, right? So you are in that period of kind of search for identity. So you are in a sort of you know, this bubble of identity crisis, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and I can attest to your punctiliousness. you were so punctual today. You came an hour before our
I tried to do that.
our interview.
But
Quite
it's
remarkable.
difficult to do that with the traffic, you know.
Absolutely.
So you always have to think ahead.
That's it.
Yeah.
So earlier you said it.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of like that ideological glue, as it were, that Pan-Africanist glue in many ways that held the diaspora together. It is thinning now, you know, because of the pressures of globalization and cosmopolitanism and the like. That sort, isn't it? So that is it.
Mm-hmm.
So now we look at the character of that so-called the diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
What is the relationship? What is the dynamic, as it were, given that we're dealing with fragmentation, as it were? You've got so many different aspects, so many different voices. Then what is the dynamic of that hometown, host country, diaspora axis?
I mean, when you look at it, it's more like, I think the diaspora is one of the most forgotten subjects of the globe, in a sense. What I mean by that is that a lot of us are not so much represented by the governments that host us, and we are not also represented by the government that we left behind. So, you know, in diasporic studies, they call it sending countries and receiving countries. So a sending country would be Gambia, for example, even though Gambia didn't voluntarily send me to Sweden, right? But in discourse terms, that's how it is called. A receiving country is like Sweden in that context. So
but again, a country can be both sending and receiving.
And receiving, yes.
Because I understand that in this country as well.
Actually, that is very interesting. Gambia, I think last time I was looking at it, 17% of this population are immigrants, which is something very interesting. We have problem with statistics in the Gambia and many other countries in the global south. But then we have a lot of percentage of the immigrant of the population that is, of course, having some immigrant background. And then when you look at that, you realize that okay, maybe Gambia is also. I mean, before we had this net plus migration. Net plus would mean there were more Gambians in this country than the one who left, you know. So you see the trend in the 90s, and that has to do with the wars that were going on in Sierra Leone and all these places. So Gambia became a host to refugees from Senegal, from Sierra Leone, from Liberia. Then during those days, we had more people in the Gambia, immigrants in the Gambia, than Gambians who left. But now we are in net minors, which is, I think, around 3,000, maybe 4,000 net minors, which means we have 4,000 more Gambians abroad than who live here.
I mean, I'll just tell you here anecdotally, quite interesting. Way back, was it in '92, between '92 and '94, when we came back, we had been abroad, and when we came back, a lot of people had come from Sierra Leone, Liberia, because of the troubles. And I remember one discussion, you know, talking to somebody, a Gambian, who said, "Oh, the number of thieves now, they've shut up because of these foreigners." Then I had to tell this person, be careful with this, don't put it that way. Someday, we might need to leave,
Yeah.
and then afterwards in the 90s we had
Yeah.
that dictatorship.
Exactly.
Most of us needed to
Exactly.
leave. So it was a bit of lesson
Exactly.
that when you were a host,
Yeah.
calm down,
Yeah,
someday
exactly.
you might need to run
Exactly.
somewhere
Exactly.
and for you to be
Exactly.
hosted.
Actually, this is what I tell a lot of people in Europe. I think somewhere many years ago, I can't remember, of course, which decade, but a lot of Europeans saw refugee in places like Syria because there were conflict, in Europe, and then, with the 2011, uprising in the Middle East and in North Africa, then you had a lot of refugees coming in. But then when you look at the reciprocity, it's not the same. When they came to the Middle East, they were welcome. They were, given all the support they needed, right? There were nothing like extremist political parties rising up here and there, right? But then, over the years, we've seen, like I mentioned before, the rise of kind of extreme political parties, which I think are lost in history because they should look at where they come from. Europe is an immigrant country, just like the United States and many other places. So yeah, I think just a reflection of what you just mentioned.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So here it seems really the distinguishing feature, as it were, with diaspora is this element of being committed somehow to the home.
Exactly.
Having
that bone, strong ties, I think.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So that, in a sense, brings in a kind of geopolitical aspect to it, because I understand that, for instance, Northern Europe, Western Europe, they don't use this diaspora as much, not in the sense that we do in many ways. So it seems that the sort of poorer countries of the world, not just in Africa, Asia, South America.
Yes.
So we have taken on this notion of diaspora, and we tend to have policies about it. And that sort of
I think that's very interesting. I think in the 90s, when the Cold War came to an end, then what you had the state rolling back, which means you had a growth of international organizations, NGOs coming on board, and the Soviet Union fell, and then you have the disintegration of the Soviet Union after the Berlin Wall. But of course, there were a lot of diaspora, let's say Uzbekistani, who were diasporans living in some parts of Russia as well. But then when you talk about diaspora today, the resilient countries that actually always come to mind is the Global South. Developing countries, and that has to do with, I think, two things, or three, I would say. You have three states in the discourse on diaspora. You have three states approaches to diaspora studies or understanding the diaspora. You have the states that are more transactional states, and that's the Global South. They are more transactional. They depend so much on the diaspora for political, social, and other means of developing their capabilities, right? And then you have the engaging states, of course, or you have, like, let's say, places like Sweden and many other places. They are the nation states that are actually more interested in probably, let's say, America today, United States. They have this American corner and many other places. Or the French have this Alliance Franco, So they are more interested in sending, in expanding.
The Chinese
have the Confucius Institute, right? So they are more interested in expanding their cultural and education, language, of course, capabilities, or they want to expand through this cultural or language diplomacy, right? Whereas Global South is more like, okay, we have a sort of a brain drain, which is now a little bit controversial in a sense, because people think it's not a brain drain, it's a brain gain. Because when people go abroad, they study, they improve themselves, they would invest, they would come back home. So they have tried to reverse it to say brain gain. So
but again, but we'll have to deal with that here a little bit. But again, when you leave, then who's going to run the civil service? who's going to run public institutions? Who's actually going to run the country? I once listened to a nice discussion between a Nigerian and a European. So the Nigerian was pointing out the fact that African governments, they're so repressive and all the rest of it. That is why they ran away. So the European said, yes, you run away, then who's going to run the country? Then stupid people will run your country. She was just completely that brutal.
Yes.
So you see that as well.
No, I think the nexus between leaving the country and staying and participating in development, a lot of people who leave probably want to improve themselves. And the more you improve yourself, you also improve what you left behind, right? A lot of people think it's not working, so I need to leave to improve myself and probably come back and do some work. I think there is no problem in terms of leaving, but what do you do when you've left? It's what's important, and whether you've come back to contribute or you contribute in other ways. You don't always have to be here to participate in nation building.
That is true, but I have to say this, it also matters a lot of the quality, the organizational quality, the policy level, the imagination, that kind of talent. Because it appears as if without that organizational acumen, I mean, policies, resources, whatever you bring in will be wasted. So that is just as significant one feels, and it's perhaps a dilemma
but you
that
know,
one has to go through.
That also takes a committed government to put the mechanisms in place to make sure that people would have this affinity, you know, the love to stay and then work. A lot of people would probably leave because one thing or the other went wrong somewhere. So I think the problem of leaving, it's a global phenomena. Europe left a lot of time. 3 million Swedes moved to the United States in the 1900s, right? Italians left to the United States, but you know, it's migration. It's a global phenomena which has existed and will exist. I heard the minister today, Dr. Tangara, mention something like that it cannot be stopped. The only way to curb it is probably to try to empower the youth, to give them something to do, which means to bring development, I think.
Absolutely. Somebody once remarked that the history of humankind is really the history of migration.
Exactly.
And if you take out of Africa hypothesis,
exactly.
You know, it's in Africa and went somewhere else. And you've also, so you've brought us now to our next theme. You've mentioned it, governments. You know, governments. They have this now around the world.
I think it's important to look at it.
That's it.
I mean,
they have this engagement policy.
Exactly. Thank you. You mentioned that. Actually, this policy to engage the diaspora came about in the early 90s. The issue of governmentality. Governmentality is the art of governing, which is Foucault term. So basically, it's like governing from. It's like, you know, we usually, there is this term, they say, the long arm of the dictator, which means you stay in your own country, but you govern your citizens abroad. So you have this kind of state policies that are interested in either governing. While you stay here, you govern your citizens abroad in one way or the other because you want to influence them. But then at the same time, they're also influencing the discourse, because there are different ways actually of participating in terms of political engagement. The diaspora can change the hegemonic discourse in the homeland, which is key in terms of maintaining stability, I think. This is why I think.
And there you've used this term, the hegemonic discourse.
Yes.
Go into that a bit for the sake of our viewers.
A hegemonic discourse, like today we in election, this is election season, right? We have political parties, we have rallies going on everywhere. And then there is a lot of discourse, like the one we have right now. It's not yet political, and I hope I don't know what direction it's taking. But you have a lot of TV shows and programs where people talk about politics, where people discuss their frustrations, where people talk about what's going on bad all the time, not the good things I mentioned all the time, where people talk about corruption, where people talk about you know, this politician is doing this, is doing that. You know, that is a kind of a discourse. It's hegemonic in the sense that it's powerful. It's trying to control the narrative for the benefit of one or two persons, for the benefit of political parties, for the benefit of organizations, and all of that. So
here are you saying that the diaspora, that voice can be a kind of countervailing voice?
Exactly. I think the diaspora, it's more than that. It's more like an agenda setter, if you know what I mean. An agenda setter it's a people or a group of, or a person, of course, or a thing that actually moves or shifts the direction of certain conversations.
Yes, but earlier on we acknowledged the fact that it is fragmented. You don't have a common platform.
Exactly.
So you have specific groups.
Yes.
Is that we are saying?
Exactly.
Who set the agenda?
Yes, exactly.
How does it work?
You have different groups, right? And each
so
group,
there are many
exactly.
agendas.
You can have like 20 different groups in the diaspora, right? Maybe 5 of them might have the same agenda, and that is, we don't like this politician, right? Others will be like, we don't like this type of system, this governance. We don't like this government, right? So you have different agenda. Each has its own degree of influence, I think.
But is it better that way? I mean, sort of, I've got this impulse, this kicking thing to sort of suggest that is it possible to come on a sort of common platform, which perhaps would make it a bigger, greater political force? Is that sort of thing happening, as it were, to other diasporas, if you know what I mean?
I think it is. It depends on where one looks at. You have social media, you have Facebook, you have a lot of Gambians today who are posting live, and they have maybe 200 viewers. But you have to know that Gambia is a very small country. You do not have to undermine those viewers, because they can do a kind of a snowball approach where, okay, I look at this guy who was speaking about corruption and it made sense to me, then I influence the way my family thinks, and of course the way my friends and everyone else votes. So that's important. We have 952,000 registered voters, which is about 80% of eligible voters. The Gambia is 2.something million, 2.4. So if someone is making a video post on Facebook and has like 200 viewers or 400 viewers, that's important. That's part of trying to control the narrative. That's kind of trying to set the agenda, right? What's important is to have a critical mind, to analyze what this person is saying and try to see whether it is based on facts or fictions. That's where we differ.
Yes, but I also have a suspicion that might be slightly idealized, because my suspicion is that in the diaspora you'll have all these representations, reflections,
exactly.
be the UDPs, be the NPPs, be that. So the fragments you have here would be sort of replicated or reproduced. I don't know what to use over there. And then you realize that each is just giving an agenda
of their own, of course, of
their own.
Exactly.
So that's sort of, maybe I'm being idealistic here as well. Maybe one was thinking of kind of transcending, as it were, this party political transcending platform, as it were, that would sort of operate on a slightly different level. I feel, one feels.
Yeah, I mean, the Facebook it's a republic. It's a place where people have different opinions, right? And it's a place, of course, where I would choose to read what someone else write or just ignore it, or comment or not comment, right? But it's important we take into consideration that a lot of the things that we see today on Facebook or on WhatsApp is a reflection of the direction which this country is heading to. It's like music, right? I remember when I did some work on the role of music in Sierra Leone in the Ebola crisis. And then my professor was like, so what do you mean that if you want to look at, I was like, my conviction, and until today, of course, if you want to know how a country thinks, listen to the music. So this is what I mean. The direction the country is heading to, or is perhaps it's still on. It's a reflection of what we have today on Facebook. fragmentation. The country is more fragmented than it has ever been.
Absolutely. So I am kind of, I agree, listen to the music, but broaden it a bit. Listen to the artists,
yes,
writers,
yes,
and all
exactly,
of these things.
exactly.
The soul,
exactly.
they embody,
it doesn't have to be the music alone.
Yes,
it could be depend on the word.
Absolutely,
it could be anything
soul.
else. Exactly.
So it seems as if here what we're talking about is that the diaspora, given the nature of our societies, and perhaps it's a good thing with democracy, plurality is, it's an important principle. So you will have the progressive bits, but inevitably perhaps you'll have the retro. Stuff, retrogressive as it were stuff. So given this reality, I wonder, what do you sort of advise to governments? Let's explore that area. You are a consultant of the sort of diaspora policy one should have, given this reality, so that we can make the best of.
It's important. Thank you. It's a very brilliant question, actually. We need to, before I give my advice, we need to understand this. There is no country where the diaspora has a common approach or consensus on, or actually all the diaspora are in good terms, diaspora citizens are in good terms with the government. You always have to have some who are, of course, not in line with what the government does, right? But then my advice would be, for any other government, is to engage the diaspora. It's like when you have a child and you are the dad, or let's say the government in this context. You know they misbehave. Some of them do misbehave. Some of them actually are doing pretty well. But you still want to treat them pretty fair, right? What I think the worst mistake a government would do, including this government, is to have this reactionary approach towards the diaspora. That would be a disaster, if you ask me. So I think it should engage the diaspora. And how do you do that? Is the question, the methodology. How do you do that? I think you can do that by building trust. But then it comes to the question, how do you build trust? That's also a methodological question. You can do that by committing yourself to communicating with the diaspora, communicate and talk, and of course increasing their political influence. Of course, we have 1997 Constitution empowers the Gambian diasporas to vote. A lot of people think that the Gambian diaspora never had the right to vote. The right is there, Section 39, I think, if I get it right. But then, for some reasons, they've not had the opportunity to do that. So it's time the government, of course, engage the diaspora. And I am not holding brief for the government, but I see some sort of commitment with the creation of the Diaspora Directorate. And you mentioned that in the beginning, of course, the website that has been launched today. Actually, I am just from there. It's been launched. It's a fantastic website. You can see a lot of things.
Earlier on, I didn't see it today. That's why I said
yes,
by the time this one
airs, it has already been launched. Yes, it has already been launched. So I think the will is there, if you ask me, and with support from other partners, hopefully the Gambian diaspora will be engaged. But then the cleavage, this political fractionism, you cannot take it away. It's always going to be there. It's a defining future of diaspora, the diaspora states nuances.
Absolutely, but overall, what happens here, because earlier on we were trying to tease out certain features of how people in the diaspora affect, as it were, what's going on here. But again, there's also a way in which what we do here also informs diaspora politics.
Exactly.
So
exactly. I think you're right. The relationship between the diaspora, of course, and the Gambia, it's not only Gambia, the government, I mean, not only, the Gambia is not unique in this, every other country. It's sort of a constitutive relationship, constitutive in the sense that they both affect each other. How we behave, how the government behaves, actually affects the way the diaspora responds. The way the diaspora behaves also, in one way or the other, affects the direction that the government takes.
Absolutely. So they're kind of like in a feedback.
It's a constitutive relationship.
Yes, in a feedback relationship.
Exactly.
In the votes, the voting bit, quite interesting. I once talked to somebody, let me just post this at you. I once talked to somebody who said to me, hey, look, remember, I think it was begun in the American War of Independence, no taxation, we do not have representation.
No representation.
So this person said to me, the diaspora, they must pay tax. So we'll turn that around and say, no representation if we do not pay tax. What do you make of that?
I think the diaspora is paying more tax than any other person in this country.
I mean, indirectly.
Yes,
given
yes,
indirectly.
I mean, 500 something million is a lot of money.
Absolutely.
It's 48% of the country's GDP. In 2020.
That was exactly what I said to this person. But this person turned around and said, yes, we understand. They're sending money to their family and all sorts of things. They're helping projects. They're helping all sorts of things.
Exactly.
But we, as we're living here, we are also taking care of our extended family.
Yeah.
We do help in projects.
Exactly.
We're doing everything we're doing. But on top of that, when you work, you got to pay tax.
Yes.
How do you respond to that?
I think the idea of taxation is really important. Even the market woman actually should pay tax. Everyone selling in the streets should pay taxes. Sweden it's a tax-based economy. It's one of the richest country in the world today, thanks to its taxes and of course tax regime.
And I understand that in the US as well. You can even live in England. You can do all sorts of things. You can live elsewhere. Yet you'll be paying tax in the US.
Yeah.
I understand that the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson had to give up the US citizenship because of to avoid that paying tax. So it is not something sort of illegitimate in many ways to discuss.
Yeah, I think when the government puts the regime in place, the tax regime in place, everybody should pay taxes. If they feel like, okay, the government, the diaspora can pay tax through paying fees at the airport, fine. But we also want representation. We want to see where our money goes, right? Because they say where your money goes is where your mouth goes.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Somebody even suggested a kind of diaspora fund. You know, that sort of thing will transcend political affiliations.
Exactly.
As long as you're there, put it there, and then for developmental purposes and stuff like that.
There were talks, of course. I think I don't know how far they've gone in terms of that. There were talks of issuing 2 diaspora bonds by the end of this year. I haven't done any follow-up to see if it has been implemented or not. But the will is there, I think, or has been there since then.
Absolutely. And I've heard something else quite interesting. So I'm using it like a sounding board. Absolutely. Yeah. But you're eminently qualified to defend these things. Somebody said to me, when you look around, you know, sometimes when we are in a sort of censorious mood, sometimes we go through that. A lot of people just sitting there, not doing anything. We rely so much on what is being sent from abroad. Are we perpetuating this culture of dependency, as they used to call it? I have heard people discuss, I mean, yes, one understands absolutely the welfare aspects of it, but sometimes you do have these sort of unintended consequences, the unforeseeable stuff, the underbelly, as it were, of some policies. Does that occur at all, that maybe are we encouraging this dependency culture that people have been writing about for a long time about us?
I mean, I think we are a very kind of, our society, it's kind of created in that way. It became, we are socialized to share. So the culture of dependency, it's an unfortunate thing, I would say, but even our government depends on other donors to function, right? So if your family depends on you, it's because you are the better one. But I think nobody wishes to depend on anyone. But the culture of, I mean, the poverty phenomena encourages or I would say forces people to depend on their family members. But there is a common theme actually in the diaspora that I can speak of, and I have talked to a lot of people, just in normal conversation over coffee or whatever. They will tell you it's not only Gambia, many other parts of Africa. They will tell you I am tired of sending money home. Now I am taking care of myself. A lot of people would tell you that. They will tell you now, I cannot even go back home on vacation because people would be coming left and right asking me for help. Now I would just buy my ticket and go to Bali or go to Paris or go somewhere else for vacation, right? I think a lot of people are realizing that the culture of dependency has getting out of hand, right? A lot of people are not being put into productive use, I think. A lot of people are being dishonest in terms of dealing with the diaspora. I know a lot of people who have been cheated of their resources, of their money, of their lands by relatives that are pretty close to them, and then they just gave up and they don't want to do anything anymore.
So that's it. So the discussion, the engagement,
exactly,
wasn't it, must have that part, as it were, that awareness, that honest discussion of what is going on, how the relationship.
I think with this country, what this country needs most also, it's like you said, an honest conversation, right? A discourse on these nexuses between dependency and poverty. It's important to talk about it.
No, absolutely, because one imagines that, because for me, how I see the diaspora is not simply in material terms, but what I call, for instance, in cultural terms. It's not only, and to me, ideas are a kind of technology, if you know what I'm talking about. I put it that way. So sometimes we say that actually this country should be flooded by diaspora people, the right people. Then the attitudes, which is an absolute key for things to change, surely.
I think that's part of what they call, skills and knowledge transfer. The skills transfer would probably be that I have a certain way of working. Let's say I'm time conscious. This is something that we should probably try to, because I think a lot of our time in the Gambia, resources are wasted on the traffic. It's a huge amount of resources that just disappear in the air because of traffic jam and all of that. Right? So there are things that the diaspora can, of course, learn from the homeland, but there are a lot of things that the diaspora can also import here in this country in terms of attitude to work. But I know a few people who've tried when they came here and they got the job, but then they gave up. Today, actually, like 2 hours ago, I was talking to someone about this. And then I'm like, okay, when you come to Gambia as a diaspora citizen and you got a job, and you have a certain attitude towards work, right? You do not have to give it up and say, I'm going to do as the Romans do in Rome, right? Try to maintain that, a little bit of it, with some balance, so that the people that you work with, they'll meet you halfway,
Absolutely.
Hopefully, as time goes on, you would all move on and find a new dimension.
Absolutely, but what a challenge, because here I'm thinking of Chinua Achebe's no longer at ease, and Obi, who came with all the idealism, but in the end the system broke him down. So finally, very quickly, what do you make of this possible, as it were, repatriation of people living in the diaspora? And recently even our government got in trouble, didn't it, with the EU, with the restrictions now on visa, because we refused to take them.
I think this is an important correction. I think the government needs to take into consideration so many issues. One of them is the health implication of the people that are being deported. A lot of these Gambians leave this country, they're healthy, they don't have any problem. They get to the refugees camps in Europe. First, they get traumatized. Two, some sell sex, actually, to make ends meet. They can contract STDs, HIV/AIDS, many diseases, and they are deported back home without a clear assessment of their health condition, and they are brought in and just released into society. That has actually, to my point of view, contributed to some of the crimes that we've seen going on in this country.
That's it. So it's not a bad idea what our government is doing, so to impose sort of stringent conditions for who could return.
Exactly. But also try to talk to any deporting country to make sure that they put the resources in place to enable these people to continue a better life when they got here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ahmad Jang. That was a fantastic conversation we had there, really very enlightening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Viewers here, of course, the the ideal, where we want to get to is that migration should be by choice, not by necessity, I suppose. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.